Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time. And yes, I am back with my good friend and yes, legendary investor, Jonathan Twombly. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. So thank you for going through my deep dive of '06 to 21 residential. As I kind of hinted in that's my experience when I answered your thought-provoking question. So you put out just this simple question in your Facebook group. Why don't you shout out the Facebook group? Then we'll talk about the question and what we both see.
Yeah. So my Facebook group is called the Multifamily Investment Community, and forgive me for a minute. I'm actually going over there now so I can get the question up. But one of the things I like to do in this group is just ask kind of thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, you just put it out there and let everybody respond, like pile in. It's awesome.
Just because, I want to, part of it is that, it's good for the group to have people engaged and, having conversations with each other. It helps them to get to know each other. It helps them it makes the group more fun. And the other thing is I'm just really curious what people think, right? So I ask questions, I try to do it every day, but I don't always get to it every day. But yesterday,
yeah, you're about 4 or 5 days a week. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I try to, there have been times I've been really good about it lately, not as much. But anyway, so the question I put up yesterday was, is multifamily in a bubble, yes or no? And most importantly, why or why not? I was trying to ask the why or why not question because I really want to know why. Because otherwise you get a bunch of answers like no, yeah.
Yes, that's not helpful.
Yeah, so I want to know why people say it is or it isn't. But I asked the question because if you've been following the multifamily markets, the cap rates are and have been for quite some time at all-time lows. And what that means is it costs you more dollars in purchase price to get the same dollar of yield, right? So to get essentially, when I started investing, looking at C properties, these are like your older 40 years or older properties in smaller markets, you had to pay basically $12 to get $1 of income.
Okay.
Now you have to pay 20
right?
Or more.
Yeah, or more. Yeah.
Maybe even 21, right? And so that has pushed the market in certain directions. And one thing, the question is it a bubble? And at least in my mind, well, it's a bubble if it's not sustainable, right? And it's a little hard for me to kind of get my head around the idea that like we just went up in a phase shift to higher prices and they're just going to stay that way forever. Now, could happen. Could happen, but it hasn't happened ever before. And we've always, reverted to the mean cap rate over time. So, I haven't had the chance to go do kind of the analysis that you have done. But maybe we should stop it here. I mean, how should we phrase this conversation?
Yeah, I want to reply with what I came back with, and then I'll kind of summarize other things I saw in the responses without calling out names. So first off, as I indicated in my very biased residential background, the pain that I saw, and I saw up close and personal with family, friends, and other investors, in my opinion, was caused by people getting yes answers to deals that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll use the example of my very first property that I sold at 264, right? The buyer was an investor who got a 2-year teaser loan, basically to make the unit break even. And then after 2 years, the payment essentially went up 150%, more than double.
Yeah.
And the idea at the time was, don't worry about it. I'll refi out or I'll sell to the next sucker because real estate never falls. So I've been in that environment. I blame the loan products and then the greed of investors that believed a story that just wasn't true, right? Real estate doesn't go up forever, right? So that's my baggage, my personal experience and scars or wisdom, whatever you want to call it. So that unfortunately is what I see going on in many, not all, many real estate deals today that come across my plate, right? I'm an accredited investor. I get deals that come at least daily, if not several a week. And a lot of them are relying on, again, what I consider a bad loan structure, IO periods, what I'll consider too short term for, large unit counts, 2 and 3 years. They have what I consider to be too much greed on rent growth, too low expenses. I mean, I don't see anything going on good in a lot of the deals that I see,
Yeah.
but the loans are still getting yes answers. And why is that? Well, just like builders build, lenders lend. And I believe they've adopted some very unhealthy practices in multifamily. So I unequivocally said that, yes, multifamily isn't a bubble. And then I got called out by someone. All right, smarty pants, are you selling? And I gladly replied with, hell yeah, I'm selling. If you want to overpay for anything I own, I'll gladly sell it to you.
So, I mean, when I, a couple of years ago, was talking about the bubblicious nature of the multifamily markets, people asked me, are you selling? And I did.
Yeah,
Absolutely
I
did.
remember.
I think the decision was a correct one, because nobody could have predicted COVID and the effect that it had
Right.
on the multifamily market. There's a lot of evidence in hindsight. I kind of thought this was happening, but I had no real solid evidence of it. But looking back, there's some evidence that we actually started going into a recession January of 2020.
Yep.
Right. So, and then COVID just sort of masked everything.
Yeah. Agreed.
So it's very hard to kind of. This was out of left field, and it wound up with the kind of happened. It did what nobody thought it would do. Everyone thought it would cause the crash in multifamily, and actually it went the other way because interest rates went so low and everything else crashed. Everyone piled into multifamily. Now let's kind of talk about this a little bit, because the lending picture in multifamily is a little more nuanced than that, right? So the lenders have not loosened their standards in terms of the debt coverage ratios they are continuing to require and have required. After the financial crisis, they put in place certain requirements, namely that you had to have your net operating income has to be 1.25 times your debt service, right? Okay. And they do that on a fully amortizing basis, even though they may offer you interest only, right? So they have maintained their standards, and what has happened is that it's causing a lot of people to be essentially priced out of the market because the loans are not getting as much proceeds as the lenders, as people want, right? So they're not getting, it's called debt constrained, right? And they're not getting the same amount of proceeds. They're not getting, like 80% never happens anymore. It's getting harder and harder to get 75%. A lot of times the properties are coming in at 65% or 60% from the lenders. So that means that your debt service payment is being held down. So that's the low interest rates may allow, like just in single family, allow people to pay more because that debt service,
of course,
is smaller. So that has driven pricing for sure. And a lot of what's happening, properties maintaining their pricing is dependent on interest rates staying low for long enough for you to cycle through, right, and refinance.
Exactly.
So that is a big risk in multifamily, right? Because if interest rates go up, it is going to become even harder to finance your property. However, there's also so banks are not the problem, let's say, in this case, right? However, what we are seeing is a lot of non-traditional lenders stepping in, offering more proceeds, and then there's also, the interest-only periods that banks are offering now has allowed a lot of people to go in and say, okay, look, this barely meets the, when I started out, the rule was you did not want to go into a deal unless that deal, your debt service coverage ratio was at least 1.5 and preferably 1.6. Because if it was not that high, you as a sponsor were not going to make any money, right? And you're going to have a hard time paying your investors. So you really wanted to go in at that kind of debt service coverage ratio. Now, and of course the banks were happy with that.
Of course.
Big cushion over what they require, over the cushion they required. Now what's happening is people are going in at that 1.25x right? But they don't, but they're using IO in order to actually make some returns to their investors, right? And also the the big hope is, oh, you're going to do a value add, and then and you're going to get your debt service coverage ratio up to where you want it to be so you can make money. And a lot of it is sort of like a hope and a prayer, right? And as a result of that, what you're seeing is you're seeing properties that are very, very common now in the market where, it used to be you had your value add guys, and then you had your like stabilized buyers, right? You had the people who wanted to take a little extra risk, get a little extra return, essentially flip the properties, right? And then make fast money, and then hand it off to somebody who's going to own it for, through the cycle. So they're going to hold it for 5 or 10 years or maybe forever, right? What has happened, and in that situation, those value add guys did a value add. They finished the property, right? Their plan was 1 or 2 years, we're going to completely rehab it, and we're going to reposition it and sell it as a different product than it was when we bought it, right? Now, what you see is a lot of those guys are going in, they're starting their value add, and they're realizing that it doesn't add up. Right?
Doesn't pencil. Yeah.
And so they're selling because they're getting crazy offers, right? So they're not making the cash flow that they anticipated, and they really can't afford to wait to do the whole value add and finish it because they just can't, right?
Yeah.
And or they're getting these offers where they're like, we have to take these offers because this is money in hand, and like waiting another year to finish the value add, they can sell it as a hope now, but if they finish the value add and the rents aren't there, right, and the NOI isn't there, and there's no like teaser like, hey, this could be really good for you, they know they're not going to sell it for what they want. So they're renovating 20% of the units, and then they're putting it on the market as a proven value add, which means, look, we got rent bumps on these 20% of the units, right? You can too, if you go and do the rest of the value add. And oh, by the way, you're going to pay me the post value add renovation value
on the whole thing
of the property.
Yeah.
But you still have to do the value add and spend the money on it, right? And people are going for that deal. And then what happens is the next guy does 20% of the units, right? And it's the same thing. Or I have seen deals now marketed as value add 2.0, which is also the seller went and did the whole value add, but now if you go do the whole value add all over again, you can get even more rent growth. Right?
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Which, these are so similar to the hysteria of 06 in residential. It's funny. It's just a different numbers.
But I'm not even done yet.
Oh my goodness gracious.
So that's one thing. What the other thing that you're seeing is now buyers can't get the proceeds that they need on these loans, right?
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to put additional debt. So that one of the things that happened in the last go round was that people were buying. The banks were allowing people to take 80 or 85% leverage, right? And then they were going and getting a mezzanine loan to go, which is what a second mortgage is, multifamily, right? And they'd levered up to like 93%, right? So, and they had to do that because the cap rates got very compressed, and to make your money work, like to make your returns where you wanted on your equity, you had to lever it up. Now the banks put an end to that after 2008, and then actually that is one of the things that can now, the multifamily loans are typically non-recourse, but they have some triggers that can make them full recourse against you, and one of them is putting additional debt on the property.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? So you can't do it anymore, but there's always a back way to do this. So one of the ways that people are doing this is they've invented what's called preferred equity, which is basically mezzanine debt.
Oh, Jesus, we're doing it again.
Basically mezzanine debt, but it's structured as equity, called equity. It usually has some kind of like kicker on it.
Yeah.
And so there's no, it's not a lien on the property, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't default on preferred equity, right?
Right, of course.
So they can't foreclose on the property if you don't meet the preferred return. However, they are standing in front of the common equity in
Absolutely.
terms of payout, right? So they make the returns to the common equity look much better because they're not participating very much in the upside. They get some kind of equity. They get some kind of kicker, like in
Hmm.
addition to their interest rate on the end. It's, I guess you could compare them to points, but they're points on the back end.
Hmm.
Um, but they're not participating in all of the upside growth. So basically you take like 25% of your equity, you call it preferred equity. It acts for your equity like debt in terms of
Yeah.
enhancing the returns. But it makes your it makes your common equity more risky because now there's like another mouth to feed ahead of you. And the private in these, the preferred equity investors tend to be very, very sophisticated folks with very deep pockets, and they know exactly what they're doing, which is they're saying, hey, this is great. We're gonna de-risk our position. We're gonna invest something that looks a little like debt, looks a little like equity. It's gonna, pay us 15% more or less guaranteed. And the guarantee comes from the fact that basically the first dollar of loss is going to be absorbed by these individual investors who are,
Yeah.
the small guys, right?
Oh
So,
man, we're doing it
um,
again. Oh, it's
so
crazy.
there is, it's kind of like leverage, just not exactly, like I said, it's not debt because it can't foreclose on it, but it is risky to your common equity because it's another mouth to feed ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes these private equity arrangements uh, require some kind of takeout after 2 or 3 years,
Mm.
and by through a refinance or through something. And honestly, I'm not sure what happens if you can't take them out, right? Like what kind of rights they have, whether it could be the rights to take over the management of the deal from the sponsor,
Probably. Yeah.
right?
Something like that.
Something like that. So um, and then
This is going to be bad.
now
Oh
you,
man.
Mr. Common Equity guy, like now your deal is being run by somebody who didn't sell you the deal that you don't know, if
Yeah.
it gets to that, right? So, and who basically doesn't care about you, right?
Yeah.
Because they're just
Um,
protecting their interests,
Yeah.
and frankly, you were just a means to an end for them to enhance their security and
Hmm.
their return in the deal. So
Yeah.
so we're seeing a lot of this, and all of this depends on on uh, you know on interest rates staying where they are. Now, I want to kind of preface this. Now, I've seen a variety of preferred equity, which I think is much better for your common equity investors, where it's like some big private equity group that comes in and does preferred equity, or some family office, but where the sponsor is saying, hey, I'm going to create two groups of shares
Sure.
for common equity,
I've seen that.
one of which is just regular equity, and you're going to get a lower preferred return, but you get upside. And the other one is, basically you get no upside, but you get a higher
Yeah. A and
coupon.
B shares almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're high, and yeah, it's always A and B shares, and you're higher up in the order, right?
Mhm.
That's that's a little better for everybody because it's just allowing the common equity shareholders are basically on the same footing, and they're just choosing how they want their return, and like if they want a little more risk, and more return, a little less risk, little less return overall,
Mhm.
but more upfront. That doesn't bother me as
No,
much.
not much. As
as,
long as it's upfront. But
yeah.
a lot of this kind of mezzanine on the side, it's equity, not debt. But it feels like, I mean, so back to the original question: is multifamily in a bubble? I think what I've just heard is I believed it was before, and now I really believe it. Now there are deals that look good and all of that, but when you talk
But
generally, oh my god.
but on the flip side, there are still some other things that push against it being a bubble, right? So I
Okay,
think on like the
let's
debt,
sure.
this on the financial side of things, it's looking it's looking a little scary, right? And
Mhm.
as I said, it all depends on interest rates staying where they are for a long time, or staying close to where they are. I mean, if they
Yeah,
move up a point, no one's going to die. But I mean, if they go up a couple points, which they could,
you
right?
could. Yeah.
Um, then it could be really tough for some people when they have to refinance if they haven't had enough rent growth over time,
Yes.
right? So um, the so it almost kind of forces people into a value add situation because they're buying very pricey deals. They have to get the rents up, right, in order to protect themselves from when they have to
Mhm.
refinance, so that they can guard against any kind of interest rate increases. If there's no interest rate increases, they're going to do really, really well on the deals when they sell,
Mhm.
because cap rates will still be low. But they need to be thinking, if they're smart, they need to be thinking about that downside protection. Okay, but so the other thing that's sort of working against the idea that there's a bubble is similar to some of the stuff that you've talked about in your last, the last session of today's
Yeah.
video, where there has been a shortage of construction for a long time, right? And
Agreed.
there have been fewer apartments constructed than necessary for quite a while. And
Mhm.
the concentration of what the thing that's really kind of striking is that where apartments have been constructed has been very concentrated as well.
Correct.
So there was, now I haven't seen the statistics for a while, but a number of years ago, more closer to the beginning of the cycle, something like 50% of all new apartments were being built in just 12 submarkets around the country.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So you talk about like concentration, and that made those markets risky, and they're the usual suspects where you think about where everybody is flooding in. Um, but around the rest of the country, it meant that there was a real shortage of apartments. And I think that there are definitely markets around the country that still have a shortage, right?
Of course.
Uh, the But I think overall there has been, absorption has been strong. It's pretty much been like, if you build it, they will come kind
Mm.
of market. Household formation has recently been rebounding, right?
Mhm.
You have had the home ownership rate go up.
Mhm.
So, the growth in the number of renters has tailed off. And part of it is because people are now moving, the millennial generation is moving into that home buyer
Mhm.
uh,
Age. Yep.
demographic, right? So that poses a little bit of a threat. But apartment construction has been behind household formation and behind population growth for quite some time. Now,
Agreed.
we're at the point now where that may be shifting, where because we've had, I think this year, there were not a record number of starts, but the highest since the 70s, basically.
Yes.
We have a huge number of apartments being started now. And what that means is that, you know the the real estate cycle for multifamily is basically the construction cycle. And what happens is, it's at the beginning of the cycle, it's very hard to get lenders to lend because they're all scared because they just went through a crash. So nothing gets built. And then as people feel safer, they start building more, lending more and building more and lending more and building more.
Mhm.
And then at some point they build so much that they can't fill it up.
Mhm.
And then there's a crash, right? And people start defaulting on their loans, and and then banks stop lending, and then the whole thing waits until those properties are fully absorbed, and then the whole thing starts all over again. We haven't. I think one of the reasons why this cycle has been so long is because they haven't been able to build enough to have oversupply,
Right.
right? And so that's been that's been why it's lasted so long. But at some point, you get into an oversupply situation. Um, and especially, I think, in some of the markets where it's much easier to build than it is in, say, New York or San Francisco or what have
Mhm.
you, some of the southern states where it's far easier to build stuff and people are just throwing buildings up.
Yeah.
That's where it's most likely to happen. And it always happens, even though, it's sort of, we've talked about this before, like, if enough, if if enough people are attracted to an investment because they perceive it to be low risk, eventually they make it risky,
Oh, of
right?
course.
So because the demand for it outstrips the fundamentals, right? And so that is likely to happen. Well, I wouldn't say likely to happen. It's more likely to happen in some of those markets where the ideal is, oh, the population is growing so fast here, construction can't keep up. Like eventually it will. It always does. I mean, like Atlanta is a market that's been famous historically for overbuilding and booms and then having really bad crashes. Right now, it's kind of a darling of multifamily world because there's been so much population growth. But Atlanta has
Mhm.
always had population growth, right? It's not like this is a new phenomenon. It's had really strong population growth for decades, right? And they've still managed to overbuild
Mhm.
during booms, right? So we'll see what happens during this cycle. So far, it hasn't happened, but some of the likely suspects for overbuilding. And it kind of was looking like this at the beginning of COVID in a few places where they were starting to have some absorption issues, were like Austin, Texas, right? Dallas, Fort Worth, some of those markets where they've just been so hot for developers and syndicators. That's where the trouble is likely to start. I think ironically enough, like New York and San Francisco may be better off and may be able to better withstand something that's coming, simply because it's just so freaking
Bloody hard.
build.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That they didn't have as much supply on the market. So
yeah. Yeah. I'll go again. I don't play in your world. I've never done a deal over 20 units. But I do see a lot of similar behavior to, again, I see investors chasing what they believe is easy money. I see lending standards or tweaks happening. I don't know. To me, I'll stand by my, yes, it's a bubble.
I mean, listen, I think the mindset is very similar. It's the can't lose mindset.
Yes, can't lose.
That's the thing that frightens me a little bit about it. It's the same kind of like, once people start thinking they can't lose on an investment, then that's the danger time. That's when complacency sets in. And you saw that in 2006.
Yep.
I mean, certainly that's how people talk about multifamily right now. I don't think that necessarily guarantees that there is going to be a crash, or that if there is a crash, it's going to be like dire, like it was in because of all the other stuff that we've talked about. The banks have maintained relative, discipline, and the demand supply issues are still pretty favorable, right? Because the supply isn't there. But the supply historically always catches up and then overshoots the mark.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is very cool. This has been a fun conversation. One more time, what is the Facebook group people need to join?
It is Multifamily Investment Community. And I ask you, please join for the first time. Well, you can only join for the first time, right? So when you join it, please use a computer, because there are some questions you need to answer, and Facebook only shows them to computer users. After that, you're free to use your phone, but just that first time, please come in by computer and mention that you saw me on this podcast. So that's great too. I always love to see if anybody's watching this, or if Michael and I are just talking to each other.
People love you, Jonathan. Do me a favor, folks. If you're still watching this, leave a comment below. Let Jonathan know you watched to the end. Take care.
Okay.